The royal ship, Horizonte Azul, stood imposingly in front of the dock, its colossal dimensions reflecting the brightness of the morning sun. For many, that vessel was a symbol of luxurious vacations and displays of economic power. For Helena Cardoso, however, that steel hull represented a floating trap, a scenario where her life was falling apart into pieces invisible to the eyes of others. At the boarding gates, occasional photographers snapped smiles of anxious passengers. Helena, 32, with wavy brown hair, almost hid behind the sunglasses she was wearing, as if she wanted to go unnoticed. She knew she couldn't. For a decade, she had been seen as the trophy wife of Carlos Aragon, 45, a businessman with grey eyes and an air of superiority. He was right behind her, waving to some acquaintances, flashing that trained smile that made everyone believe he was a fascinating man. "Helena, my dear," he called firmly, "don't go so fast. We have to go up together." Helena's heart beat faster when she heard that voice, not because of its sweetness, but because of the subtlety of someone trying to control her every step. She slowed down. Next to Carlos, everything seemed impeccable. Expensive clothes, calculated language, unquestionable influence. A few meters away, Camila Dutra, the wife of one of Carlos's partners, smiled. "What a beautiful couple. Helena, that dress of yours is stunning." Helena forced a smile. She was wearing a cream silk gown. It had been a gift from Carlos. She hadn't chosen the color or the style, and she hated the way it clung to her body. They went up to the deck, where there were already lively groups, laughing and toasting with champagne. Helena tried to take a deep breath, but all she could breathe was the heavy sea air mixed with the feeling of suffocation. First night on the cruise. Parties, cocktails, conversations to the sound of background music. Inside the luxurious main hall, imposing chandeliers hung, creating silvery reflections on the faces of the guests. Businessmen, celebrities, all in elegant attire. Helena was with Carlos, who moved from one group to another, always keeping his hand on her waist, as if she were an accessory to show off. "Carlos, we need to talk about tomorrow's meeting," said Roberto Moreira, an old business partner. "Have you decided whether you will invest in the new export project?" "I'm evaluating," Carlos replied, smiling formally. "But we still need a greater sign of confidence from your partners, Roberto." Helena just listened without any interest in it, until Roberto's gaze fell on her. "And our dear artist? It's been a while since I've seen one of your exhibitions, Helena." Her stomach turned. Artist. No one had called her that for years. Perhaps they didn't even remember that before her marriage, Helena had been a promising painter. Carlos's gaze hardened, although he maintained a smile. "Helena is very busy with social and philanthropic matters." His voice sounded dry. The message was clear. Talking about art was a waste. Helena felt a tightness in her chest. She wanted to disappear, but instead she smiled without showing her teeth, pretending to agree. As the background music increased and the event gained more guests, Helena tried to move away to get some air on the outside deck. She needed to be alone, at least for a moment. As soon as she stepped onto the deck, a gentle breeze touched her face. She leaned on the railing, contemplating the dark sea, vaguely remembering the time when she could paint freely. "Helena!" Carlos's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Why did you leave without telling me?" She jumped, her heart racing. He approached slowly, his face worried. "You're acting strange. We already told you that you can't just disappear from the party like that without an explanation." She swallowed hard. "Sorry, Carlos. I was just tired." He brought his face close to hers. To someone watching from afar, it would seem like a romantic gesture. But in reality, he spoke almost in a growl. "Don't make me look like an idiot. Go back in there, put a smile on your face and do your job." Fear spread across Helena's gaze. Still, she nodded, swallowed her anger and returned to the hall, stepping lightly so as not to make any noise. The next morning, Helena woke up to the sun shining into the presidential suite. The beams of sunlight streamed through the heavy curtains, outlining the silhouette of expensive furniture. Carlos was no longer in bed. He had probably left early for some impromptu meeting with his associates. She thought about taking advantage of her solitude to rummage through something that would distract her. She walked to the closet in the corner where there were suitcases. Looking for clothes, she came across a small suitcase stored there. She opened it, revealing brushes, paints, and an old notebook, her inheritance from times gone by. She ran her fingers over the brushes, remembering when she would spend hours in front of a canvas, composing imaginary worlds. Her body trembled with longing and fear. Carlos had never approved of her involvement with painting. To him, it was a waste of time and a stain on his status, something undignified. Helena bit her lip, but decided to take the risk. She picked up the pad and with a pencil began to scribble the lines of a female face, the desperate look, the hand trying to free itself from something invisible. Each stroke made her heart beat faster, as if she were daring to break a powerful rule. Suddenly, there was a noise behind the door. Helena put everything back in her place with a start. The door opened and Carlos came in, his eyes widening slightly when he saw her by the closet. "Looking for something?" he asked, frowning. "An outfit for today," she disguised, feeling her face heat up. He studied her for a few moments, looking suspicious, but he just nodded. "Get dressed. We're going to meet the Moreiras and other guests for lunch. Remember to behave yourself, okay?" She nodded, her head down. That final phrase, behave, echoed like a new threat. The restaurant reserved for the meeting shone in the midday light. The panoramic windows allowed a mesmerizing view of the ocean. At the table, Helena and Carlos were joined by Roberto Moreira and his wife, Soraya Moreira, a woman who was always attentive to the details around her. "So, Carlos, I believe we can close that import deal if we..." Roberto began, explaining figures and projections. Helena looked at her plate without appetite. At one point, Soraya touched her hand, calling her attention. "Are you okay, Helena? You seem so quiet." Helena looked up, meeting Carlos's gaze, who was watching her. She tried to smile. "I'm just tired. This ship is huge and I didn't sleep very well." Soraya shook her head with an air of genuine concern. Roberto, on the other hand, continued talking about business, and Carlos dove back into the subject. A few minutes later, Soraya excused herself from Helena, suggesting that they go see the view from the upper deck. Roberto and Carlos stayed talking. Walking through the corridors, Soraya said, "Helena, sorry to be so blunt, but you look downcast and tense. It's not the first time I've seen you like this." Helena pursed her lips. She thought about saying that everything was fine, but when she looked into Soraya's warm eyes, she felt like breaking down. What if she was the only trustworthy person in that seemingly small world? I'm going through some troubles," he whispered. "It's complicated. Do you want to tell me?" Soraya insisted, placing her hand gently on her shoulder. "It's just, Carlos can be too controlling," Helena said evasively, choosing her words. "Sometimes I feel suffocated." Soraya sighed. "I understand. But if you need help, I'm here, okay?" Helena's face lit up for a second. It was such a relief to know that someone saw her beyond the role of trophy wife. Late in the afternoon, Helena escaped to the deck again, escaping from the incessant chatter. She watched the sea, tinged with pink tones by the sunset. That blue expanse reminded her of an unfinished canvas. She thought about going back to her sketches. But what if someone saw her? What if Carlos found out? The wind was messing up her hair when she heard footsteps. She turned around nervously, expecting to see Carlos. However, she was surprised to see a man who appeared to be middle-aged, with gray hair, an intellectual air, and wearing a wrinkled linen shirt. "Sorry to bother you," he said with a slight smile. "I'm Horacio Matos, an art curator. I organize exhibitions on luxury ships. I recognize you. It's Helena Cardoso, right?" Her eyes widened. It had been years since she had heard her name associated with exhibitions. "Sorry, maybe I'm mistaken," he said quickly, noticing her start. "But I've seen your paintings in cultural magazines. You had a modern impressionist style, didn't you?" Helena felt a wave of conflicting feelings. A stranger had just mentioned a name she had almost forgotten. The painter Helena Cardoso. She swallowed hard, confirming, "Yes, but it was a long time ago." Horacio came a little closer, looking at the sea. "I'm organizing a show tomorrow on the main deck. I thought maybe—" She interrupted. "Thank you, but I don't paint anymore. My husband doesn't like it." The curator raised his eyebrows, intrigued. Before he could answer, Carlos appeared, his expression grim. "Who are you? Some annoying fan?" Horacio cleared his throat. "Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. I'm Horacio Matos, curator of the art exhibition on board. I introduced myself to your wife. I really like her work." Carlos let out a brief, humorless laugh. "She's retired from the screen, but thanks for your interest. We need to go now." He grabbed Helena's arm firmly and pulled her away. As they walked down the hall, he hissed, "Are you showing off as an artist? I already told you I don't want you going around giving rise to gossip." Helena shivered, remaining silent. Inside, she felt the old flame of indignation. Horacio Matos really knew her old work. It throbbed in her mind, bringing back memories of a self that she tried to suppress in order to survive in that marriage. That night, the gala dinner was taking place in a majestic hall. Musicians played violins, and the food was served on fine china. Helena, however, felt her stomach churning. Carlos, by her side, kept a diplomatic smile for each person who approached. "So, Carlos," said an investor, toasting with red wine, "your company's shares have gone up, haven't they?" "Yes, we are expanding," he replied proudly. Helena said, "Excuse me," and walked away to an area near the windows. She needed to breathe. She spotted Soraya in a corner, apparently also bored with the business conversations. Soraya signaled for Helena to come closer, but before she could take 2 steps, Carlos intercepted her. "Are you already walking away? We have to keep up appearances," he whispered. She felt her heart flutter. She was fed up with keeping up appearances. "I just want to sit down for a bit," I said, without looking at him. He frowned. "Not now. Let's go to the Dutra's table. We need to talk to them." She obeyed, keeping quiet. Her whole body begged for a minute of peace, but Carlos dragged her to where Camilla Dutra and her husband were laughing at something that certainly didn't interest him. Inside, Helena screamed, "Enough!" The next morning, Helena woke up before Carlos. She spied on him, motionless in bed, and decided, "I'm going to draw." She took her hidden notebook, sat down by the window, and began to sketch the same female figure in desperation, but now adding colors, imagining strong brushstrokes. The woman in the illustration stretched her hands out of an invisible cage. The sun illuminated the paper, revealing nuances that made her feel alive for a few moments. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Carlos standing up behind her. What is this?" His voice sounded rough. She froze. She watched as he took the pad from her hands, examining the image. "Still drawing?" he asked, unable to hide his irritation. "It's just something personal, Carlos. I won't reveal it." He threw the block on the bed. "I don't think it's funny. I already told you that this could harm our image. People might think you're not doing your job." Helena felt a twinge of anger, but lowered her head. "I don't intend to show it to anyone. Sorry." With a sigh of contempt, he put down the notebook and went to the bathroom to get ready. Helena took the notebook back. The pages were not damaged, but she felt that the soul was. As the day progressed, Helena noticed strange movements. Carlos received mysterious phone calls, speaking in low tones, preventing her from hearing. Something about shipping, short deadline, and external investors. At a glance, she caught his tense expression. Then he would leave, saying only, "Stay in the room, rest." She obeyed, but she didn't relax. She could smell trouble. She decided to search through drawers and folders in the presidential suite, which were full of documents. She found bank statements from tax havens, contracts with shady companies, names she didn't recognize. She saved as many photos and notes as she could on her cell phone. Before returning, he heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. He put everything away. When Carlos came in, he was on the couch with the TV on, pretending to be distracted. He stared at her for a long time, as if measuring her. "You're very quiet. You haven't been anywhere today, have you?" She shook her head. "I just stayed here." He kept his suspicious gaze, but didn't say anything else. That night, while most of the passengers were enjoying parties, Helena saw the cabin empty again. Carlos had left, claiming to be in business meetings. The tension that was taking over her grew worse. Business? On a cruise ship? She thought of Horacio Matos, an art curator. Could she ask him for some kind of help? She decided to look for Horacio in disguise. She walked through the corridors until she reached a small gallery on the lower deck, where paintings and sculptures were being installed for the next day's exhibition. There was the middle-aged man leafing through papers and talking to an assistant. When he saw her, he was visibly surprised. "Helena, you came to check out the exhibition?" he asked, trying to be polite. She looked around apprehensively. "Actually, I came to talk. I need some advice." He pointed to a chair, moved away from the assistant and sat down. Helena approached. "You said you admired my work, but I haven't painted for a long time. My husband doesn't approve." He arched his eyebrow. "Forgive me for asking, but why? You don't need permission to produce art." She lowered her eyes. "Carlos is controlling, and I think he's involved in something serious, illegal. I found documents, but I'm afraid." Horacio took a deep breath. He seemed to understand that there was more to this story than a simple marital conflict. "Who could you talk to? A friend, a relative?" "I have no one to trust right now, except maybe Soraya Morera. But," he hesitated, "I don't know if I can put her at risk." Horacio stood up, went to a document folder and took out a card. "I know a private investigator, Ramiro Costa. He has helped artists in delicate situations. If you really found something compromising and need protection, maybe he can help." She took the card, putting it in her pocket. "Thank you. Just don't tell anyone, please." He nodded. Before he could say anything else, Helena said goodbye and left, glancing over her shoulder to make sure she wasn't being followed. Locked in the booth, clutching the card, Helena pondered her next steps. Call a stranger? What if it was a bigger risk? But what did she have to lose? She took a deep breath, picked up her cell phone, and dialed. "Hello?" A firm voice replied. "Ramiro Costa speaking." "Sir, I am Helena. I received your contact from Horacio. I think my husband is involved in crimes and I need help." The investigator maintained a calm tone. "I see. Where are you now?" "On a cruise, but we're docking in a port in 2 days. I think I can disembark." "Sure, when you land, we'll meet in a public place. Will you have documents? Evidence?" "Yes, I do. I'll photograph everything." He left instructions about the place and time at the next port and asked for maximum discretion. Helena trembled from head to toe as she ended the call. She felt like a traitor to her own husband. But the truth was that Carlos had betrayed her first, in every way. The next morning, Helena intensified her evidence collection. She took photos of strange contracts and saved suspicious PDFs on her cell phone. She also gathered the little money she had with her. Carlos, suspicious, questioned her. "It seems like you've been rummaging through my things." She denied it, claiming that she was just looking for a headache remedy. He watched her with that fierce gaze, but found nothing in sight. The hours dragged on in an unbearable expectation. Carlos forced her to accompany him to another lunch with his friends. She was a complete formality. She answered questions with a smile, but her heart was pounding. The time is coming for me to free myself. That night, Helena thought about warning Soraya, but she was afraid of involving her. She preferred to remain silent. If everything went well, the investigator would help her report Carlos, and she would disappear long enough for him to not be able to find her. Finally, the ship docked at the port. Tourists were bustling about, some wanting to go on tours, others wanting to stay in the city for a few hours. Carlos, with a serious expression, warned, "Stay on the ship. I won't be long. But don't leave here. Got it?" Helena obeyed, feigning conformity. As soon as he left, she left the cabin, blending into the crowd of passengers and descending the ramp as discreetly as possible. On solid ground, she felt a breath of freedom in her chest. She took a taxi to the meeting point with Ramiro. She found him in a simple, busy cafe. He was a man in his 50s, unshaven, with piercing eyes, sitting at a table with a laptop open. When he saw her, he gave her a subtle wave. "Helena," he greeted in a low voice. "Have you managed to gather any materials?" "Yes." She handed over the unlocked cell phone. "Everything is here, and I have notes on a flash drive." Ramiro connected his cell phone to the laptop, analyzing some files with an increasingly surprised expression. "This is big. Fraud, smuggling, political corruption. Your husband is deep in it." "What now?" Helena's voice trembled. "I'll contact people I trust. For now, you can't go back to the ship. He probably already knows you escaped." Helena's heart raced, confirming her greatest fears. She thought of Soraya, who was still there, but there was no way to warn her without giving away her own escape. "Come," Ramiro said, putting away his laptop and calling her out. "I know a safe place." In a small apartment on the outskirts of the port, Helena dropped her bag on an old armchair. The windows overlooked an alley. The place was modest, but with every minute she spent there, she felt more at ease than in the luxurious suite. "Go take a shower and rest," Ramiro suggested. "I'll contact some of my colleagues at the police station. With this amount of evidence, we can start an investigation." She nodded, exhausted. She needed to process everything. After a shower, she sat on the couch, wearing the simple clothes the investigator had laid out for her. She looked down at her hands, still shaking. As soon as it got dark, her cell phone vibrated with messages from Carlos. "Where are you? Come back now. You'll regret it, I swear." With each message, her fear was rekindled. Ramiro took the phone from her hands. "It's better not to answer. He's already noticed you're gone." With a fragile voice, Helena asked, "What if he finds me? He has a lot of money, power, contacts." Ramiro took a deep breath. "We will do everything we can to protect you, but we need to speed up this investigation. And if you can, report everything publicly as well." "Publish?" She thought about the repercussions, the scandal. My God. It is the most effective way to pressure the authorities to act. In the following days, Helena barely slept. The news was already talking about the disappearance of a big businessman's wife during a cruise. Carlos appeared on national television crying, playing the shaken husband. "Helena, my love, if you can hear me, come back. I don't know what happened. I just want you back safe." She watched this with nausea, unable to believe his cynicism. The tabloids speculated that she might have a lover or be involved in a robbery, all manipulated by Carlos's influence. Ramiro reassured her. "This defamation tactic is common. Don't be shaken." To cope, Helena scribbled on a pad she bought at a nearby stationery store. Art had become her breathing space again, even though she now drew darker lines, depicting anguish, bars, and tearful eyes. In return, the investigator was working hard, calling on reliable contacts in the police. However, he could never be too careful, as Carlos could have corrupt agents working in his favor. One afternoon, Helena received an unexpected visit. Soraya Moreira knocked on the apartment door, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. "How did you find me?" Helena asked, astonished. Soraya entered, closed the door with a sigh of relief. "It was difficult, but I managed to track down some clues. I needed to see you." "Why?" "Carlos is out of control. He and Roberto. They talk about an Operation Phoenix. Something much bigger than just business. Illegal things. I want to help." Helena felt a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Soraya, this is dangerous. You can't get involved." "I'm already involved," she exclaimed with tears in her eyes. "Roberto keeps me in the dark, but I've heard strange conversations, threats, and I'm worried about you." Ramiro appeared in the room, cautiously assessing the visit. Helena introduced him. Soraya then explained everything she knew, confirming that the criminal network extended well beyond Carlos and Roberto, encompassing politicians, judges, and high-ranking businessmen. "They have a name for this powerful group, the Council," Soraya murmured, trembling. "I don't know who they are exactly, but Roberto fears them more than he fears the law." Ramiro frowned. "That complicates things. We need to gather even more evidence, and fast." Helena saw Soraya hold back a cry. "I'm going to go back to the cruise ship and pretend to be normal. But Helena, if I find out anything else, I'll let you know." They exchanged a hug. Soraya left as stealthily as she arrived. The next few days were increasingly suffocating. Helena devoured every piece of news, distressed. Carlos was expanding the smear campaign against her, creating sensationalist headlines, accusing her of everything possible. Even so, Ramiro continued his investigation, exchanging information with honest delegates who had not yet been bought by the council. Helena, tormented, tried to maintain her sanity by painting. Inadvertently, her paintings, improvised on large sheets of paper, took on the contours of a denunciation. She began to include symbols she had seen in Carlos's documents, figures, hidden names, as if she were trying to purge the demons from her mind. When the apartment seemed to be completely suffocating her, Helena had a bold idea. "Ramiro, what if I exhibited these paintings in a gallery? Not just as art, but as a public denunciation. They won't be able to ignore it if it becomes a topic of cultural media." Ramiro looked at her thoughtfully. "It's dangerous. You'll expose yourself a lot." "I'm already exposed. And the bigger the repercussion, the harder it will be for them to silence me." He understood the logic, even if it was risky. The gears began to turn to organize a sudden event where she could reveal what she had discovered. The big day of the exhibition arrived. Through Ramiro's contacts and some independent journalists, Helena managed to secure a space in an alternative gallery, famous for hosting emerging artists and experimental exhibitions. The place wasn't huge, but it was credible. The walls were covered with Helena's works, canvases, posters, and drawings that combined artistic aesthetics with real documents about the conspiracy. Each painting featured references to the names, values, and figures she had discovered in Carlos's archives. The invitation to the event, which was shared on social media, read "The Truth in the Shadows, Helena Cardoso Exhibition." Hours before the opening, Helena was shaking with anxiety. She was wearing simple, almost casual clothing, but there was a firmness in her eyes that had not been seen before. Ramiro was coordinating security, placing trusted people at the door and inside the gallery. Soraya had appeared, bringing news that Roberto and Carlos were gathered together, furious, ready for any desperate action. "The council won't let this go unnoticed," Soraya warned. "They're capable of anything." Helena took a breath, wringing her sweaty hands. "We need to do this." At the appointed time, the gallery began to fill up. Curious journalists, art bloggers, even some renowned critics who remembered Helena's name from past exhibitions. She stood at the door in a sort of informal reception, greeting everyone with a tense smile. When 7 o'clock arrived, one of the organizers asked for silence so that Helena could speak. On a small improvised stage, she cleared her throat, her eyes filled with tears from nervousness. "Good evening. I thank you all for coming. First of all, I apologize if you feel uncomfortable. I haven't exhibited in years, and the works you'll see here are not just art. They tell a real story that I'm living, a story of manipulation, violence, and crime." A murmur ran through the audience. Cell phone cameras were already pointed. Some reporters were broadcasting live on social media. Helena continued, "I could write a dossier or deliver evidence anonymously, but choosing to paint was my cry for freedom. Each canvas reflects a part of the criminal scheme I uncovered, led by powerful people, including my husband, Carlos Aragon. It is risky, but the truth must prevail." People looked at each other, surprised by her boldness. Helena then asked everyone to walk around the exhibition. Each painting had captions denouncing suspicious amounts, names of shell companies, illegal transactions. Everything was coded in brushstrokes and collages of printed documents. As the reaction was immediate, journalists began recording videos and interviews. Some, in disbelief, questioned the veracity of the allegations. Helena explained, showing photos and original extracts that she had kept. The noise grew louder, and the gallery took on an urgent atmosphere. Suddenly, a group of men in ties entered. One of them looked like a private security guard. The other appeared to be Carlos's aide. They tried to attack Helena, but were stopped by 2 undercover police officers who were on duty at the scene. The commotion drew even more attention. "This exhibition is a farce," shouted one of the henchmen. "Remove it." Helena stepped back, frightened, but Ramiro appeared beside her, showing police identification. "The event is legal, and Ms. Helena has proof of the accusations. I suggest you don't touch anything." The cameras focused on that discussion, broadcasting it live. The confusion only increased popular curiosity. Minutes later, the lights flickered and went out. A sudden blackout plunged the gallery into darkness. Screams echoed. Helena froze inside. Were they trying to sabotage the exhibition or something worse? That's when she heard hurried footsteps. A hand grabbed her, pulling her. She tried to free herself, but Ramiro's voice sounded in her ear. "It's me. Let's get out of here now." He led her through the back using a flashlight. Soraya followed, terrified. They passed through narrow corridors until they reached a side street. A car was waiting for them with its engine running. They jumped in and the driver took off, disappearing into the night. Helena looked back, seeing the streets grow distant. Her heart was beating like a drum. "Did you have time to show everything?" he asked, almost out of breath. "Yes," Ramiro assured. "That live broadcast was enough. It's already spread across the internet. The council and your husband will have a hard time covering up what they saw." Soraya, sitting next to him, wiped her sweaty face. "I hope the decent police act quickly." Later, after being taken to a police station, Helena received a flood of news. The main news was that some members of the council, taken by surprise, had begun to move to silence sources and cover up their tracks. Tensions were rising, and Carlos, who had disappeared after the fiasco in the gallery, was being sought out for clarification. "Unfortunately, they will react," Ramiro warned. "People of that caliber don't accept going down without a fight." "And what will we do?" Helena's voice trembled. "We need to protect you. Don't go out alone. Some trusted police officers will stand guard, but you have to stay away from public places for a few days." Helena felt like crying. She thought that by exposing everything she would be free immediately. But the truth is that this was only the first battle. Soraya, standing, was talking on the phone, trying to find out the whereabouts of Roberto and Carlos. She hung up with a shaken face. "It seems they escaped. The police have arrest warrants, but they can't find them." Helena put her hand to her mouth, swallowing her despair. If Carlos was hiding, he could try anything against her. Time passed in anguish. The media continued to report on the allegations. Independent outlets wrote reports, and even major television stations began to cover the issue, although some tried to discredit Helena. At the same time, several corrupt politicians and businessmen were mentioned. A crisis was growing at the highest levels. Helena had been placed in a temporary shelter under the care of 2 agents. One afternoon, she received news that her story had gained widespread repercussion on the internet, mobilizing people to protest against corruption. She cried, relieved and overwhelmed, in front of a television that repeated headlines: "Businessman's wife accuses husband and secret crimes network." Ramiro appeared at his side, placing his hand on his shoulder. "You're being brave, but don't let your guard down." She sighed. "I don't even know if I'm brave. I'm just tired of living in fear." Days later, an urgent call shook up that apparent calm. Federal agents, having tracked down information from the investigation, asked Helena to appear at a specialized police station to give a formal statement and consolidate the investigation. Ramiro warned, "We're going in an official car. Any false step could be dangerous." On the way, Helena looked out the window, remembering when she boarded the ship Horizonte Azul. It seemed like an eternity ago. At one point, she passed a giant poster of Carlos, printed on an old charity campaign advertisement. She felt a chill. It was like seeing a ghost. Arriving at the police station, a dozen journalists were jostling each other, asking questions. Helena lowered her head and quickly entered. Inside, she gave her testimony for hours, describing the attacks, the frauds, the documents. By the end, she was exhausted, but with the feeling that each detail added was a nail in the coffin of Carlos's organization. One night, Helena tried to sleep in the safe room, but sleep would not come. Suddenly, she heard screams and noises downstairs. She ran to lock herself in the bathroom, fearing the worst. From there, she heard heavy footsteps, a crash as if something was breaking. Then, the voices of police officers ordering someone to surrender. Then, silence. She opened the door, her heart racing. She found Ramiro and the 2 agents panting. There was an unconscious man on the floor, apparently a henchman sent to break into the house. "We managed to detain him," a police officer said, "but this confirms that they knew where you were." Helena hugged her own body, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't stay there. Once again, she had to pack her few things to be transferred to another, even more confidential location. With each change, it was as if life lost stability. At this point, Soraya reported that she had leaked internal information. The council was planning a cleansing called Project Resurrection to eliminate any threat. Helena was at the top of the list. This terrible plan included attacks, destruction of evidence, and bribery of authorities. When Helena found out, her legs almost gave out. She remembered the painting she had done of a woman in chains, and she felt that she was still bound by chains of fear. But she decided not to give in. She gathered her things and fled again, relying only on Ramiro and a few allies. Amidst this chaos, a ray of hope emerged. Headlines popped up. "Corruption scandal affects high ranks. Police launch operation against secret network of businessmen." Several prominent figures were arrested. Press helicopters filmed police movements. The country commented, outraged, on the enormity of the crimes. Helena, in hiding, learned that Roberto had been captured, but Carlos and some of his accomplices had escaped. The image of her husband, once a respected philanthropist, now appeared in news reports that pointed to him as a fugitive. She feared a final retaliation, a blow of desperation. Around dusk on a cloudy day, Helena received a call from an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. "Helena?" said the voice. It was Carlos. Her heart raced. "You destroyed me in the media. You destroyed everything I built. Why?" She held her breath, surprised he had gotten the number. "Carlos, I only told the truth. I couldn't stand your lies and aggression anymore." He let out a harsh laugh. "Do you think you've won? That you'll live in peace? I must remind you that I'm still your husband and always will be." Helena felt dread run up her spine. "You will not intimidate me." He smiled cynically. "We'll see." She hung up. She dropped the phone, shaking. Ramiro approached. "What there was? He called me. He said that—" She couldn't finish. Ramiro clenched his fists. "That means he's close by. We'll double our vigilance." The next day, Helena received a call to appear at a press conference alongside federal police and prosecutors to reinforce the accusations against Carlos and the council. She hesitated, but understood the need to maintain public pressure. Ramiro and Soraya agreed. At the event venue, camera flashes were going off everywhere. She sat at a long table, surrounded by authorities. A police officer clarified the investigation, confirming the existence of a network of money laundering, influence peddling, and even attempted murder of witnesses. When it was Helena's turn to speak, she swallowed the lump in her throat. "For years, I lived under manipulation and abuse. I was finally able to gather evidence. I ask that justice be strong. I hope that women who go through something similar find courage and help." The commotion was instantaneous. Some reporters shouted questions, but the security team quickly ended the press conference, fearing incidents. Shortly after this public act, Soraya received a message from Roberto, who was in prison, saying, "Carlos is coming for her. Be careful." The warning was vague but terrifying. The police moved Helena to another location, a protected house in a remote area. The siege was closing in. One moonlit night, Helena, alone in her room, began to paint again. She chose a large canvas with dense colors, projecting the image of a burnt phoenix, but reborn from the ashes. She spent hours there until dawn broke. "I won't let them erase me," he whispered. The search for Carlos intensified. Police helicopters flew over ports and clandestine landing strips. The whole country was talking about the matter. It was the biggest corruption scandal in decades. A network so large that it involved judges, deputies, businessmen, and even celebrities. Meanwhile, Helena tried to keep her mind occupied. Ramiro said that they already had enough evidence for a gigantic trial, and that without a doubt, a large part of the council would be overthrown. She, however, was worried. Why haven't they caught Carlos yet? It was in this tense atmosphere that the final card came. An informant told the police that Carlos had a cargo ship ready to set sail during the night. He was trying to flee the country. The authorities planned an ambush at the port. They asked Helena to stay safe. But close to midnight, Helena received an anonymous call. A distorted voice said, "He kidnapped Soraya. Come to Warehouse 4 on the pier, or she will die." Helena froze. Soraya, her only faithful friend, was held hostage. She needed help. She warned Ramiro, who called the police. A rescue operation was hastily set up. On the way, Helena trembled, her mind in turmoil. Had it been a trap? It probably was. Still, there was no option. The cars arrived at the dark pier. The police officers stood in silence. Helena, against Ramiro's wishes, wanted to go first because the anonymous voice had demanded her presence. She entered a large warehouse, lit by a few lamps with a smell of rust and salt. In the center, he saw Soraya tied to a chair, her eyes full of terror. Beside her, Carlos appeared, armed. His face was gaunt, full of resentment. "Finally, my dear," he said sarcastically, pointing the gun at Helena. "Did you come alone?" She kept her voice trembling but looked at him. "Leave Soraya alone. It's with me that you want to settle things." He laughed bitterly. "You and your dirty art exhibition have ruined my reputation. And you think I'm going to allow you to continue living freely after all this?" Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself not to collapse. Behind the stacked boxes, Ramiro and the police officers moved stealthily. Carlos, noticing a movement, grabbed Soraya, putting the gun to her head. "One more step and I'll kill you both." Terror was etched on Helena's face. She raised her hands. "Stop, Carlos. I surrender. But please, let Soraya go. It's not her fault." He pressed the barrel to Soraya's temple, who was crying, petrified. "Shut up!" he shouted. "You have always been so weak, Helena, so insignificant. Did you think a bunch of scribbles would save you from me?" The hatred and suffering that had been contained for years exploded within her. "They're not scribbles," he replied with unexpected firmness. "It's art, it's true, and I won't keep quiet." A shot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off a metal box next to Helena. She fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Police and thugs exchanged gunfire. Amid the pandemonium, Helena crawled to Soraya, who was motionless but unharmed. She tried to free herself from the restraints, and Carlos shot her again, grazing Helena's shoulder. A burning pain invaded her body, but she persisted until she forcefully broke the knots. Ramiro and 2 officers appeared behind Carlos, shouting, "Drop the gun!" Amid gunfire, Carlos tried to run. He limped out a side door, leaving behind echoes of fury. Soraya hugged Helena, both of them trembling. The police continued in pursuit. After a few tense minutes, the news came over the radio. "Suspect arrested!" shouted a police officer. Helena, breathing in sobs, sank to the floor of the warehouse. Soraya and Ramiro knelt beside her, trying to stop the bleeding from her shoulder. The sound of sirens invaded the night. Finally, Carlos was captured. The following weeks turned into a long recovery process for Helena. First, from the injury to her shoulder, which fortunately was not serious. Then from the reopening of old psychological traumas. She had nightmares. She remembered Carlos's screams, the slap on the ship, the mocking looks. But there was a balm. The messages of support that came from countless women who identified with her story, as well as the progress of the criminal proceedings against Carlos, Roberto, and a large part of the council. News reports of imminent trials, overwhelming evidence. The conspiracy was crumbling. One sunny day, Ramiro visited her and brought newspapers. The headlines read, "Historic convictions hit corruption scheme. Businessman Carlos Aragon receives maximum sentence." She read it trembling, but felt a lightness in her chest. Did that mean she was finally free? Soraya, who was by his side almost the entire time, was also reflecting on her own life. Roberto, her husband, was serving a long sentence. She herself was rethinking everything she had experienced in that world of luxury. Now, she was determined to start over. When Helena was discharged from the hospital and settled into a small apartment, she discreetly began painting more often. She opened every box of paint she had left and, for the first time in many years, did something for herself without fear of retaliation. Her makeshift studio received light from the window in the morning, and she painted until she was exhausted. The themes were still strong, speaking of pain, but also of rebirth. She worked on the image of a woman on the rough sea, holding a paintbrush as if it were a sword. She felt that each color represented an emotion that had been overcome. At the same time, some lawyers approached her to discuss the divorce. She decided to sign everything immediately, once and for all, ending the legal bond that bound her to Carlos. Upon completing the process, she felt a breath of freedom. Finally, Helena Cardoso. Months later, an art gallery announced the opening of a new solo exhibition, Reborn from the Shadows, by Helena Cardoso. The name said it all. Helena, now more confident, chose to present her journey to the world through painting. The invitations included a brief synopsis, without directly mentioning the scandalous case, but it was impossible to separate it from the repercussions it had caused. On the day of the opening, critics and curious people crowded the space. The paintings displayed symbolic elements, broken chains, open cages, stained but firm wings, representing overcoming. In one of the rooms, there was a gigantic panel with clippings of newspaper articles pasted on it, on top of which Helena had painted herself, standing facing the viewer. The event caused a stir. In a corner, Soraya watched, moved, as Helena was interviewed by international media outlets. The recurring question was, how does it feel to expose this pain? Helena replied, her voice calm but vibrant. Art was my way of screaming when I had no voice. Today, I scream not only for myself, but for those who are still trapped in silence. At the end of the exhibition, Helena retired to the gallery balcony, contemplating the city lights. Everything seemed different from that luxurious deck where she had suffered humiliation. A gentle wind touched her hair, and she remembered herself long ago, lost and frightened. Now she felt like she was in control of her own path. Not that she was completely healed. She still had scars, sleepless nights, and traumas that would take years to heal. But she was determined to move forward, one step at a time, supported by the art and truth she had chosen to expose. When the gallery curtains closed to the public, Helena walked among the paintings in silence. Each one told a painful chapter, but also carried the victory of not having been destroyed. In one corner, a large painting of the phoenix, full of warm colors. She smiled, touching the painting. "We are stronger than we believe," he whispered. At that moment, Ramiro approached, bringing Soraya. The two friends hugged each other tightly, tears of hope shining. The investigator maintained a look of satisfaction at seeing them safe and rebuilding their lives. Thus ended the circle that had begun with Helena in silence, boarding a ship that had turned into a nightmare. In that moment, in the stillness of the gallery, she was reborn, free and ready to paint the next chapters of her story. Now, with her own light. End.